Okay, so by my reckoning, it's 3 o'clock GMT, and I'm going to make a start. And I'd like to welcome you to this seminar on what works for me, which is a kind of my take on personal growth work using EFT. And before we get started, kind of make the usual announcements. This has my guarantee that this probably won't make you any richer, thinner, or more popular just by attending this webinar. I have a very kind of low scale promise here. It's kind of hopefully that there'll be some useful information for you to assist you in using EFT, but no grand claims. I'm here in the rather wet, windy, and getting dark cold of December in Northumberland. There's myself and Sally the dog asleep on the couch behind me. Because, excuse me, when we're recording this, it's getting close to Christmas. The postman is getting later and later, and Sally has a particular tendency to want to jump up and annoy the postman. So if the postman arrives, there may be some screeching and squawking and barking and yelping, and just to reassure you that that isn't me. Hopefully, it's not going to happen, but I have to give you a little bit of a warning about that. Okay, so let's get started. And the first thing I need to say is to give you an opinion alert that what I'm going to present in this webinar is stuff that I've developed over the years and that works for me. Now, how well it works for other people or how you could engage or use with it, I don't know. So this is kind of very much my personal take on things. It's not the right answer. It may be a right answer, one of the right answers that are possible, but it's not the only way of doing stuff. So I just want to be very clear about that. Your mileage may vary with this. So, okay, having got all the disclaimers, or most of the disclaimers out of the way, here's what's next. This is the menu. This is what we're going to be covering, or I'm going to be covering in this webinar. So the first part is where I'm coming from, what my kind of take on all this is, how I kind of develop these ideas, what my kind of philosophical background is for the stuff that I do, the way that I tackle problems. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about what I want from my tapping, what benefits I want to get from doing the tapping, why bother with all this kind of self-development work. This is my answer to that particular question. The next one is a kind of a little side piece on two of the problems with problems. Now, the problems are a kind of approach to dealing with them. There are kind of two specific problems that go with any problem of any description. I want to talk about those because they're often missed when people talk about dealing with stuff, issues, and the like. These two problems sometimes get missed. Then I'm going to take you through the kind of principles I operate from, and some of the strategies I use, and finally some tactics that I use to get the results that I do. So hopefully this is all going to come clear as we carry on. So I'm just going to move to the first slide. So where I'm coming from. The first thing to say is that I'm a Buddhist. I've been a Buddhist for 25 years now. Just in case you're worried, this is not going to be a sales pitch for a mysterious Eastern religion. Kind of Buddhists aren't really into that kind of thing. But it does kind of inform the way that I think about things. And the basic idea behind Buddhism is that suffering is an inside job, and that it comes from us having difficulties or struggling to come to terms with the way the world is, and the difference between the way the world is and the way that we want it to be. Now, some of the approaches used in Buddhism, I think, are very helpful in work with EFT. And the first one I want to mention is mindfulness. If you're in the self-help area, or if you're in the professional help area, then there is a lot about mindfulness going on at the moment. There's lots of research going into mindfulness. Mindfulness praises is being sung from on high for all sorts of things. And mindfulness is, at least the definition I'm using here, is just paying close attention to your ongoing experience. And just being able to be mindful of what's going on for you is a hugely useful skill. Being able to notice what's happening in our ongoing experience is very useful, especially when it comes to what it is you're going to tap on. The second thing that I think is really valuable from the Buddhist perspective is compassion, and that's kindness to ourselves and to others. And I think if you're doing any kind of self-help work or self-development work, then being kind to yourself and to the other people around you is a supremely useful attitude of mind to have. So those two things, mindfulness and compassion, I think go together very nicely. The last one I want to mention is the notion of practice. I'm sure this is true in other kind of spiritual or philosophical traditions, is that it's kind of very much on the idea of continuous development, continual practice, and becoming more adept at skills. So it's kind of not the sort of idea that there are miracle cures, is that what you get out of something is the amount of work that you put into it. So it's kind of very much organized around continuous practice over time. And I found that a very helpful place to come from with respect to EFT. Okay, a little more recently, 14 years ago now, I think, I became an NLP practitioner, neuro-linguistic programming, yet another one of those three-letter words from California. I became a practitioner, a master practitioner of NLP, and also a trainer of NLP. And NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, is one way of describing it is the study of the structure of subjective experience. And what that fancy title means is basically, once again, paying close attention to how our experience is built up, the way that we construct or represent our reality, our experience to ourselves. And NLP and EFT, in my opinion, were made for each other. Gary Craig, the founder of EFT, was also an NLP practitioner. So I think anyone who uses EFT will be well advised to find out more and do some training in NLP. It would make a very good pair. And likewise, anyone who's done any NLP would be very well advised to, excuse me, get some training or some experience of using EFT, because I think they're a very good match. Okay, just excuse me. One of the things I forgot to mention is I'm coming in from the tail end of a cold, so I'm a little bit croaky at the moment, so I apologize for that. And finally, not surprisingly, coming from EFT, I found EFT 10 years ago, and one of the things I like about it, one of the many things I like about it, it's a very simple way to change your experience, and it's a very simple tool for self-help. In fact, I think it's far easier to use EFT for self-development work than it is to use NLP. Together they're a great combination, but just by itself, EFT is something quite extraordinary in my opinion. Okay, so that's where I'm coming from, my kind of philosophical background, if you like. The next question is, what do I want from tapping? I mean, why do the tapping thing? I mean, what is it about it that might be useful to me? What's the kind of the purpose or the reason for doing it? And I've got a couple of reasons for doing it. And the first one is, I want to go from resistance to acceptance. Me. As I mentioned, the kind of notion in Buddhism is that suffering is a result of kind of resisting the way things actually are. So it's kind of, and there is a lot of suffering to be had if you kind of have an argument with the universe about what things are actually going on. Usually the universe will win. So this kind of struggling with the way things are is a kind of very large source of distress and discomfort to us. So what I'd like to be able to do is to go from resisting the way things are, having things not go my own way, to be able to accept something. Here's the important parts. That's not accept in the sense of being a doormat, but accept in the sense of, okay, this is the way things are. What do I want to do now? How do I want to respond to this? How do I want to act in this situation? What do I want to do? What do I want to choose? So to be able to see more clearly and to be able to act more effectively. And I think having less resistance and more acceptance is a good way to do that. Okay, so that's the first one. The next one is to go from reaction to response. Um, a lot of our reactions to events, people, situations have been conditioned into us. If you've ever had the experience of um, meeting someone and they say something you don't like and you have an instant kind of angry response, the feeling of anger rises up, or some other kind of dislike or displeasure or aversive reaction, that's almost kind of automatic. That kind of, someone only has to say something and you get this kind of this reaction, this kind of instantaneous, programmed, conditioned response. And we've been programmed by years of experience, we've had years of conditioning to respond the way that we do. And what I'd prefer to do is, rather than just react, fly off the handle, or have this kind of instantaneous reaction to what somebody says or does, or what I'm saying or doing, is to be able to respond, which is to say, how do I want to be in this situation, to have the opportunity, a little gap of freedom where I can choose my response instead of being just having an automatic reaction to what's going on. So it's kind of an ability to choose how I want to be in this situation. And there's a lot of freedom in that, because then I can go off autopilot and decide which way I want to go. And my suspicion is that most people are on autopilot in terms of their emotional reactions for quite a lot of the time. And it can be a hard thing to shake. I think EFT is a really good process for taking care of that. Okay, what's the next thing? I want to have more choices. I want to go from a situation where I feel I have very few ways of behaving in situations to having more freedom to choose. And this is kind of a little bit along the same lines as the reaction things. I have lots of conditioned responses, lots of ideas about who I am, how I should behave, how I can behave, what's possible for me, that limit the way that I'm able to act. To use Gary Craig's metaphor, that's kind of like to have writings on the walls, to be kind of constrained or restricted by what I think is going on in the world and what I think I can do. So one of the things I really enjoy getting from tapping is to have more choices, so I can be more flexible in any given situation. And following on from that is that this gives me the ability to do things differently. And what, in one way of looking at it, is the whole purpose of life is to be able to move this physical body through space and time, doing what we want to be able to do, doing things, having an effect on the world, having an effect on the outer world, having an effect on the inner world. And the degree to which we can do things differently is the freer we can be, the more successful, whatever that means for you, we can be. So to be able to do things differently, to be able to change my behavior. So a very simple example, if I had a fear of flying, then I would probably be very unlikely to fly. It kind of restricts my abilities. If I lose the fear of flying, then I have the ability to choose to be able to fly or to not to fly. I've expanded the range of possibilities, and either one of those would be just as easy as the other. So the ability to do things differently is very important to me. So the more flexible I am, it seems to me the more I can get out of life. The last one is to have more clarity. And by that, I mean to be able to understand situations and take decisions with as much clarity as possible, to be able to, in as much as I can, in as much as any human can, see clearly what's going on. So for example, if I'm consumed with resentment or anxiety or fear or jealousy or anger, then my perception of a situation will be clouded, will be more, and will not be very clear. I'll be influenced by the emotional states that I've got going on. I won't be able to see clearly what's happening, and if I can't see clearly what's happening, then I can't act. sensibly. So to have more clarity so I can act more accurately or more adroitly is very important to me. So this is what I want to get out of tapping. Okay, so let's go on to the problem with the problems. And here is the first problem with a problem. And that problem is the resistance. And this, the resistance can apply to any problem whatsoever. And it's this kind of parts of us that kind of stand in the way of us changing. Because really, if you wanted to change, if you wanted to develop, and there was no resistance, you just do it. If you wanted to do something else, you'd just do something differently. There'd be no problem with it. But there is always some kind of, or often some kind of resistance, some kind of limits, blocks, fears that kind of keep us where we are, keep us from moving forward. And this resistance is one of the things EFT is really helpful in taking care of, but it's oftentimes people are not actually aware that they are resisting making the change. So you might like to try this as a little experiment for yourself. I'm going to give you some sentences, and I'd like you to kind of repeat them to yourself and just check in with your response to them. There are a couple of, statements to do with change, the desire for change, and I'm going to offer them to you as a way of testing out whether they're true for you. So here's the first one. And you can think of any sort of situation to apply these to. But here's the first one. Just entertain the thought for a moment, I don't want to change. And just notice, is there any truth in that? You don't have to say anything. I just want you to notice, is there any truth in that? So here's another one. It's not possible for me to change. And just kind of try that one out. Notice if there's a feeling of, yes, that sounds like it might be true, or no, that's just a bunch of words, or anything in between. Here's the next one. I'm not capable of changing. Okay, the next one. I don't deserve to change. Let's try out that sentence. I don't deserve to change. How true does that feel? Next one. I'm not worthy to change. Okay, and the final one. I'm afraid of change. So just noticing what this kind of your senses of change, whether change is possible for you, you're capable of it, you deserve it, do you want to change, or whether you're afraid of change. Because if you're going to do self-development work, then the idea behind that is that you actually change some aspect of your being. So if you want to change, on one hand you want to change, and on the other hand there is kind of resistance to that change, that's going to make it a bit of a struggle. So it's, even before you start doing the self-development work, it's worth kind of using EFT, or being able to use EFT to work on those kind of resistances or reservations about changing. Okay. If you have any questions about that or comments to make, please feel free to type them in at the little box on the right-hand side, and I'll do my best to answer them as I go along. But is that making sense on the kind of the whole thing about the resistance? We'll kind of revisit the resistance a little bit later on. Okay, thank you, Debs. The next bit, problem goggles. Problem goggles are, it's a little bit tricky to explain this. It's kind of, here's a metaphor. And it's like being, if you think of the problem as being a jar, container, pickle jar, jam jar, whatever it is. If you're inside the jar, it's very hard to read the label. Something about being inside a problem or a difficulty that makes it difficult to see what the alternatives are, what the solutions are, what ways you can go. So having the emotions that you have in that problem state, or having the thoughts that you have in that problem state, actually limit your ability to perceive what's possible. And because it's the way that you see things, it seems like this is a perfectly natural or reasonable way to think about it. You may have had the experience of speaking to somebody and they've kind of described a problem which isn't a problem for you, it's a problem for them. And you can see from the outside immediately what's required or what they're missing or what they need to do. And you might suggest that to them and they can't see it. It just kind of does not register with them at all. Or you may have had the experience of being on the other side where somebody else has described a solution to your difficulty and it's not made any sense to you either. And this is problem goggles. And the trouble with problem goggles is they can have a tendency to stop you doing anything to sort out the problem, because part of the problem goals might be this is the way it's always going to be. There are very good reasons why I have this problem. It's to do with my potty training or the kind of like my genetics or my diet's all wrong or my friends are bad or I've had this horrible upbringing or whatever it is. The whole trance of the problem, if you like, stops you from taking action to change it. So just like to bring that to your attention as something to consider, think about. Okay, so those are the two problems with the problems. So let's move on to principles. Principles I operate from when I'm doing personal development work. And the first one is don't avoid the problem. I guess if you're interested in self-development work, then you're probably have a sense that avoiding the problem is not the right way to go, but avoiding things is an extraordinarily popular approach to difficulties. And not thinking about a problem or not turning our attention to something else, distracting ourselves with television or food or going out or shopping or all the very huge number of ways that people have of not thinking about things seems like a very sensible thing to do. Just take your mind off it, have a little bit of a rest. The whole avoidance thing though is although it's very common, doesn't work very well for a couple of reasons. However hard you avoid the problem, it'll always be there. It'll come back. Most problems kind of hang around. The second thing is the avoidance, sometimes called experiential avoidance, is actually correlated with anxiety and depression. But the more you try to avoid something and the more you try to keep it out of your consciousness, the more anxiety you'll experience, the more depression you'll experience, which is kind of an unfortunate consequence of this. So if something comes up, then I kind of think, okay, so this is something that needs sorted. So I'm trying to be very kind of straightforward and clear on myself that this is something that needs to be worked on. So here's the next one. Fixing the world is difficult. Don't try to fix the world to fix the problem. If you can't avoid the problem, then another popular way of working with things is to try and organize your life so you don't experience the problem. So you might want to change the job, ditch the boyfriend, move house, go somewhere else, do something else, change what you're doing, changing the way the world works so that it doesn't bother you so much. This is very hard work. Changing the universe is very, very hard work. It takes a lot of effort to kind of rearrange things so that you won't be triggered or discomforted by stuff. So that's one disadvantage with it. The other one is that if you have the idea that the difficulty you experience, the limitation you experience, is somehow something that you've learned or something that you do or some pattern that you operate, if you change the world, then what will typically happen is that you'll have the same kind of problems just in a different location or just with a different person. So the emotional baggage and the limitations that are operating from you will follow you into the new situation and then start, after a little honeymoon period, start acting again, because wherever you go, there you are. So it's worth kind of thinking, rather than fixing the world, what can I do to change the way that I feel or I respond or I react? How would that be a more fruitful way of working with stuff? So here we go. Here's the other one. Use everything. Um, I think one of the difficulties with EFT or tapping is that some people see demonstrations, say in training, so they see YouTube videos, and because EFT works so well with things like traumas or very phobic responses or very difficult or painful emotions, and fixes stuff fairly easily and fairly effortlessly. I think a lot of people have the idea that EFT is just for disasters. Like this, I'll keep it on the shelf until something terrible happens, and then I can tackle that particular problem and be comfortable, feel more comfortable again. I think using EFT for just for emotional traumas is a huge waste of its potential. I think there's an awful lot to be said for just doing consistent work on little things, and the work that you do on the little things will lead eventually to big benefits. And this kind of tunes in with that idea of practice that I mentioned before. If you wanted to get good at meditation, you wouldn't just meditate, for 2 hours once every 6 months or something. You'd have a meditation practice. It might be 20 minutes once a day, or an exercise routine that was half an hour 3 times a week. It's the consistent use over time that gives you the big benefits. So for me, I try to use it on everything that comes my way, given the limitations of time, but not to dismiss something as being too inconsequential for it. I think there's an awful lot of mileage to be gained from just using it on the small stuff. Here's my next principle, is that a problem is actually an opportunity. Most people don't like problems. Most people like to get away from problems. Most people experience problems as blocks in their lives, and that's understandable. I tend to think of problems as being an opportunity to grow, self growth opportunity. So rather than being a block, a problem is a gateway into some larger space that I haven't yet occupied. So rather than kind of thinking, oh no, I've got a problem, this is terrible, this is a horrible limitation, going to kind of try and get away from it, I kind of have the thought, at least if the problem is of a modest nature, thinking, oh good, here's an opportunity to expand, to have more room to maneuver. So to kind of approach it as an opportunity to get as much out of it as I can, as much learning out of it as possible, as much change out of it as possible. And with EFT, that becomes possible. So it's kind of my attitude towards problems is perhaps rather different to the general public attitude. Okay, I hope that makes sense, because if you can adopt the problems or opportunities idea, then that's really helpful in giving you the encouragement to make use of EFT. The next one is take responsibility um, for how you respond to situations. That's not the same as taking the blame, but taking responsibility, acknowledging that I acknowledge I'm responsible for how I conduct my life. And it's kind of, it's down to me. What I do is down to me. So rather than kind of looking for someone to blame or feeling sorry that I'm a victim or something, it's kind of like, at least it's the degree that I can to take responsibility for my experience and what I do and to make the best use of it. Okay, and the next one is this tapping is a practice. This is like saying that EFT is more like exercise than a cure. So in my opinion, a little and often is the best way to get the most out of EFT. Working with stuff on a regular basis to build your skill and your confidence and your expertise is a great way to go forward. And it also clears out a lot of stuff in the process. So it's not as though it's kind of all sweat and tears. It's possible to make a great deal of progress quite rapidly, as long as you're kind of consistent and use it on a regular basis. So that's probably enough about the principles. That's the kind of the way I approach stuff. So hoping that's all making sense so far. So I'm going to move on to strategies. Oh, but before I do, I'm going to make one of those kind of safety announcements, like they do on airplanes before you take off. Um, Sometimes I've had clients who've kind of been doing self-development work. They've been following stuff, and they've tackled stuff that really was very big for them, kind of like very intense, very difficult. And I just want to kind of make it's kind of rather obvious safety announcements. It's kind of like in the event of an emergency, or if things get very, very difficult or challenging, um, it's by far the best thing to do is to find someone to work with, find someone to help you. Some things you can tackle by yourselves, and some things are just too much to work with yourself. And it really helps to have a uh, knowledgeable friend, knowledgeable EFTer, knowledgeable practitioner help you and guide you through things that are a little bit difficult. So you don't have to do everything for yourself, and some things are best done um, with some guidance. I'm just going to drop that in as a kind of little safety note. So here we go. Strategies. The first strategy I would say is, well, first of my strategies, is trying to be clear about what's going on. I think the more I can be clear about what's happening, the easier it is to find stuff to tap on, and the more likely it is that the tapping is going to have some beneficial result. So here are some questions that you could ask yourself if you're in a problem situation that you want to work with, something you want to work with. And the first one is, what's going on in my outer world? Which is like, what's the context of this? What's happening? Is this a problem with a relationship with a partner? Is this a problem at work? Is this some sort of difficulty with my kids or my parents? Is this some, what's the kind of context? Who's involved? What's going on? The next question is, what's going on in my inner world? And what are my emotional responses to this? What do I think in this situation? What do I feel? How do I feel? How do I react? What do I do? This is kind of the most useful place to be pointing the EFT, because you have much more access to what's going on in your inner world. It's the kind of stuff that you tap on. So noticing what's going on in you with respect to what's going on in the outer world is very helpful. The next thing is, what can I change in my outer world? It might be that there's something in the circumstances that you can change and make things better. If somebody is standing on your foot, it makes complete sense to ask them to get off, rather than to tap for the pain of having somebody stand on your foot. There are things that we can change in the outer world, so it's useful to do those things. The other question is, what can I change in my inner world? How would I like to be different? What would I like to be different? How would I like to respond? Which leads me to the last question, is, how do I want to be in this situation? What is it that I'm doing now? How do I want to be? So this is kind of mapping out an idea, a territory for how I want to be, what I want to explore, what I want to change. That gives me some kind of access to things that I can tap on. Okay, so the next strategy is pay attention to the experience, not the explanation. We have so much access to pop psychology, real psychology, bogus psychology, different ideas, theories, perspectives about why we are the way we are, what's wrong with us, it's our potty training, it's our kind of our neurotransmitters are all amiss, that kind of stuff. Rather than pay attention to the explanations of things, the reasons why things are the way they are, I find it much more useful to pay attention to what's actually going on. What am I feeling? What am I sensing? What emotional things are going on in me? What emotions am I experiencing? What thoughts am I having? What goes on in me, regardless of the explanation? Some people, I've noticed this amongst counselors particularly, like to spend a lot of time looking for the ins and outs of the story of things. And my suggestion is to put the story to one side and to pay attention to your internal experience that goes with the story, because that can be tapped on. And you may have had this experience if you've done some tapping. You may have noticed that the way you think about things after you've tapped on them changes from the way you think about them before. And so your explanation may disappear in a puff of smoke as you tap through experience. So my suggestion, my recommendation is to let the explanation to one side and pay attention to what's going on internally as a better place to start tapping. You don't need to have a degree in psychology to figure out what's going on either. Anybody can pay attention to their inner experience. Hope that makes sense. Okay. The next one, write everything down. Think on paper. If you're going to do some work, make notes of what's going on. Write down your experience, write down the feelings you're thinking, the thoughts you're having. Our inner experience, particularly in difficult circumstances, is so rich, so various, so fluid, so fast that it's really helpful to capture stuff on paper. So to kind of write down how you're feeling, what you're thinking, as a way of catching this stuff as it flies through consciousness. And that gives you a way of kind of gives you several benefits. First of all, it helps you understand how you tick, what goes on in you, what kind of emotional states follow on from what kind of things you often think. It also gives you a way of tracking your progress. So you can kind of notice, okay, so this emotion has gone from a 9 to a 7 to a 3 to a 2 to a 0. It also helps you get back on track if you're interrupted. It's very easy to disappear into the undergrowth of our minds as we're doing tapping. So it's a very helpful way of getting back on track. It lets you also notice the pattern of things, start to get an intuitive sense for how these things all hang together, which gives you a way of reflecting on your experience and what leads to what works with what doesn't work with what. So it's a very useful way of building your skills. And also, if you have a historical record, you can check your progress over time. So I can't recommend this writing things down enough, really. And there are parts in my trainings where I kind of talking about limiting beliefs. I can go back to a collection of limiting beliefs that I used to believe to give us examples for people to try out for themselves. It's a really helpful way of seeing that, oh my goodness, did I really believe that? And check again and find that it's still not true. It's being taken care of once and for all. And I encourage you, great that you're doing it, Danuta, and I encourage everybody to write stuff down. I think it's a really helpful way of kind of working things along. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. Break the problem down into smaller pieces. This might sound like something from page 3 of the Book of the Bleeding Obvious, really, but it's surprising. It's amazing to me how many people kind of sit in a sort of stunned paralysis because the things that they're trying to work on seem too big for them. So to the degree in which you could, if things seem too big, then break it up into smaller pieces. You know, the old line about, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So I have a collection of techniques, some of which I'll be sharing with you as we go on. If I can talk faster, I realise time's passing on here. So breaking things down into smaller pieces gives us stuff that we can actually work on. And that leads into the next one, which is change something. And anything. There's no need to worry about what's the right thing to change. If you start changing things, each change in a difficulty or a situation or some kind of predicament will give you a little bit more room to maneuver, a little bit more freedom, a little bit more leeway, which will take you to the next step so you can change that as well. So rather than sit paralyzed again, trying to work, what am I going to work on? How am I going to tackle this? Go for the smallest thing. Start making changes and then take advantage of the changes that come from that. And allied with that is a phrase that comes from, of all things, computer programming. I used to be a computer programmer in a previous life, and that is do the simplest thing that could possibly work. In a situation, do the simplest thing you could think of that would make any difference. Do that first. Only make things complicated later if you have to. It's very easy to think how am I going to tackle this? What kind of all-in-one tapping script? What fabulous, clever setup statement would solve this all in one? I said, just do the simplest thing. Just give it a go. If the simplest thing doesn't work, then move on to the next most complicated. That makes life a lot easier if you do it that way. Okay. If you're not sure what to do, if in doubt, attend to the sensations in the body. Just pay attention to what's going on inside you. You know, twinges in your stomach, tightness in your chest, clenching in your throat, stiffness in your back. Whatever else you have, or however you think about it or feel about it, eventually those things have some sort of representation in the body. So if you can't think or feel about it, there'll be stuff going on in your body, sensations or absences of sensations. So if all else fails, go to the body and start tapping just on the physical manifestations of this situation. Okay. The last one is, well, not quite the last one, almost the last one, is looking for limiting beliefs. This is part of the writing it down thing. I'm always fascinated to find out how many limiting beliefs I am. I think I could write a book. I'm a kind of poster child for limiting beliefs. I could write a very large, fat book on all the different kind of limiting beliefs I have. And it's really useful to find these and to take care of them, because taking care of them gives huge benefits beyond the specific problem. So if you have, for example, the limiting belief, I'm not good enough. Taking care of I'm not good enough, using tapping techniques, would have huge benefits in all the other areas of your life where I'm not good enough operates. So an idea like I'm not good enough probably influences, taints, limits you in all sorts of different aspects of your experience. If you can take care of that, you can get huge benefits out of that. So I do keep a lookout for limiting beliefs, and we'll kind of zero in on those and have a go at those just as well and as quickly as I can. Okay, move on to the last strategy, which is to test things. And that's to kind of to go back into the difficult situation, see, has this changed? I know in whoever trained you probably went on quite a bit about testing your work. If you've watched any videos about EFT, it'll be about testing. It's an extraordinarily important part of the effort, and I think a couple of things can happen when you test what you've done, is that things have changed for the better, and that what used to be a problem is no longer a problem. Or it might be that things have not changed quite so much, but now you have some ideas about what to work on, what you need to do to complete it. Or if things are barely noticeable difference, then it says, okay, so what I did the first time around wasn't worthwhile, so I need to try a different approach. So testing something is a hugely beneficial way of finding out what to do next and whether the work is done. So rather than hoping for the change, go and find out, see whether it's changed or not. And if not, come back and adjust what you're doing until you get the change you need. Okay, I'm talking way longer than I thought I would, so I'm going to go into tactics here. So I'd like to suggest for you is that for talking about tactics, you might like to think of a problem or difficulty or something you're working with at the moment, and just to kind of pick one of those to use. I'm going to go through a few techniques, and you might like to kind of try some of these things out. So here's the first tactic, and that's to do with uncovering resistance. Okay, so thinking of your difficulty, your problem, whatever it is, let's say to yourself, I don't want to change. Just notice the score on that, 0 to 10. Just make a note of these for the moment. It's kind of, you can always go back and tap on them. Here's the next one. I am afraid of resolving this issue. Fear is often a large part of resistance, so it's worth noticing this. Next one. It's not possible to resolve this. If you have the belief that something's not possible, then the chances are you're not even going to try. So it's well worth tapping on this kind of issue. I'm not capable of resolving this issue. Next one. I don't deserve to resolve this. And finally, it's kind of rather interesting one here. I don't know who I'll be without this. If you've been a smoker for 30 years and then you stop smoking, who will you be? If your identity is wrapped up in smoking, then that's kind of a bit of a challenge then. So kind of, who will I be without this? So even before working on the problem, kind of thinking it's useful to be able to undo any resistance you have to working on the problem. If you don't undo the resistance, then the actual work itself is much harder because you're going against some of these unconscious pulls. Just makes everything a lot harder. So if there's any kind of resistance to tackling this, it's worth taking care of the resistance first. It'll make the rest of it so much easier. So that's the first tactic, uncovering resistance. The second one is sneak up on the problem. If the problem is big and you don't know what to do with it, then it's worth kind of sneaking up on it, or kind of tapping along around the edges. And so rather than directly addressing this, is to kind of uncover some kind of for the more kind of remote or distant aspects of the problem. There are two ways I'm going to give you for doing that. The first one is to complete the sentence. This problem is. So it could be, this problem is overwhelming, this problem is too big for me to handle, this problem is too scary, this problem is, and so on and so on and so on. Each of those sentences is a tapping opportunity. Even though this problem is too big for me to handle, accept myself and how I feel, and so on and so on and so on. So that gives you kind of some tapping phrases to work on that are kind of around the edge of the issue, but are not kind of directly addressing the issue, at least yet. And the next one, which is kind of a little bit similar, is I feel something about this problem. I feel overwhelmed by this. I feel afraid about this problem. I feel intimidated by this problem. I feel dread about this problem. So once again, these are feelings about the problem, not the problem itself, feelings about them. And those can be tackled. This is a way of kind of diffusing very intense issues from a distance. So working on these kind of the outer edges of things until the overall intensity has been softened and you have some more ways in. So once again, it's just change something, change anything, and work from that. Okay, so that's sneaking up on the problem. The next one, I hope everything's okay. So I'm having to rattle through these because they're kind of taking rather longer than I thought. Next one is unpacking the problem. And that is to kind of deconstruct the problem into parts, to tappable parts. And the first way I'd like to suggest is pencil and paper tapping. I did a webinar, recorded a webinar on pencil and paper tapping, so you can find a whole 40-minute presentation on how to use this approach on my YouTube channel. I'll give details about that at the end. So pencil and paper tapping, that's kind of like the situation. It is, they are, I am. It's kind of breaking the problems down to three different kind of aspects or perspectives and using that to generate tapping phrases. So that's the first one. The next one's a little simpler. So when I'm in this situation, this predicament, whatever it is, I think, I feel, I do. What are the answers to these questions? When I'm in this situation, I think I'm never going to get out of this. I think it's beyond my abilities to achieve this. I feel disheartened. I kowtow to the other person. I always go along with what they say because I haven't got enough strength to resist them. Whatever it is, so what are you thinking? What are you feeling? What are you doing? This gives you access to tappable things. And then there's a final possibility. What does this situation remind me of? A lot of problems have a kind of repetitive quality. A lot of situations have a repetitive quality. Oh no, here we go again, that kind of thing. So if you have a sense of where this kind of whole pattern of interacting began, taking care of the memory of that can be a very useful part of deconstructing the problem. Okay, so far? I think what I might do is make this presentation available for a download so people can kind of study it a bit more carefully. Okay, excellent. Okay, thanks, Debs. Let's go on to next one, find the beliefs. This goes back to that kind of finding the limitations. So finding the beliefs about the problem. So one way of doing this is because you can say this situation is like this because. So let's say I'm overdrawn again because I'm no good with money. Let's say I'm struggling with this person because I'm not able to stand up to people. So it's kind of the situation, whatever the situation, the problem is like this because. Answering this question will uncover some of the limiting beliefs that are operating, some of the ways of thinking that are operating in the situation that help the situation be the way that it is. And a kind of another variation on this here is, I have this problem because. And so, I have this problem because I'm not good enough, or um, I have this problem because I don't like speaking in public, or I have this problem because whatever the answer is. So completing these sentences is a good way of kind of starting to unpack or uncover the web of beliefs and ideas that are holding you in place, that hold the problem in place. It's kind of like, in some ways, beliefs are problem glue, really. Kind of the mental spider's web that holds us in place. Okay, so that's it with the tactics. Now, usually at some point in some of the webinars I've watched, and probably some of the ones you've watched, is there's a kind of rah, rah, rah bit where the presenter gives you some motivational advice. So in my rather eccentric, elliptical way, I thought I would give you some kind of a little bit of motivational advice, some kind of as a way of kind of wrapping all this stuff up. I just have to point out that the guy with a can and the guy with a pipe, neither of those are me. Although I have to say that the guy with a pipe has got a very interesting take on things. So here we go with the first bit of motivational advice. The first one is start. And if you haven't started, what on earth are you waiting for? The meter is ticking. There's kind of lots of stuff to do, so start. That would be my first piece. And it's amazing the number of people who don't start. The next one is, if you've already started, keep going. Keep going. There's a lot to do, and it's the journey. Was it the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step? Well, this is true, but then there are all those other steps you have to take as well. So keep putting one foot in front of the other. Here's one. Pay more attention to what changes than to what seems to stay the same. If you have quite a common difficulty for people who have lots of difficulties, is that they direct their minds to where things aren't changing, to where things stay the same. Kind of sort of chronic problems stay the same because your attention is always directed as to how things are still as bad as they were, quietly ignoring the stuff that changes, the things that get better. So I'm going to suggest it'd be very helpful for you to pay attention to what actually changes. When you do a piece of tapping, make a little change, to notice, to bring your attention. Okay, so what's different here? What am I able to do now? What do I feel now that I didn't feel before? So the more attention to the changes you can direct, first of all, the better you'll feel, and also the more motivating it is to start to carry on making more changes. So put your attention on what changes rather more than what seems to stay the same. Um, Another one from page 3 of the Book of the Bleeding Obvious. If what you're doing is working, do more of it. If you find some approach that really works for you and you're making excellent progress, do more of that. And of course, the contrary is true. If you're kind of finding what you're doing isn't working on what you're working on, do something else. Try something else. Go have a look at some other aspect of it, work in it in a different way. So just kind of like profit from your own success, learn from your own success, and make the most of it. Another one that's surprising, this stuff only works if you use it. I have a suspicion that a lot of people who kind of do EFT trainings or workshops or read books think this is fabulous. They try it out for a little bit and then they kind of put the book on the shelf and never actually use it. And this stuff is like exercise. That only works if you do it as well. So it's kind of like it only works if you use it. So get the most out of it, make the most out of it. And the last bit is good luck, really. It's a hugely worthwhile endeavor. I can say I've kind of 15, well, more than 15 years, this kind of personal development stuff. It's well worth the effort. I can say that I'm not the man I used to be, and it's an improvement. And that's because I've done a lot of these things, done a lot of this work. It really makes things a lot better, but you do have to do it. So I encourage you to persist. Okay. Oh, advice and wisdom. All right. Hopefully the wisdom. Okay, so here's talking about wisdom. Here's a bit of recorded wisdom for you. And these are the webinars I've done previously that will give you some more insights into some of these techniques. There's inclusive tapping, pencil and paper tapping that I mentioned, exception tapping, which is one way of working with limiting beliefs, soften limiting beliefs, how to find limiting beliefs, how to use the description of a problem to come up with a tapping solution that changes things. So all those are free. They're all on my YouTube site, YouTube channel, which is this long kind of URL at the bottom here, Practical Wellbeing UK/video. So so that's about, what's that, about 6 hours worth, or just under 6 hours worth of webinars to kind of help you with different ideas of carry on. And if that's not enough for you, then there's also the 2 books so far that I've written, Getting Out of Your Own Way, which deals with this kind of uncovering limitations and the like, the EFT collection, which is 12 tapping techniques of practical well-being. Nearly done. And finally, and not least, thank you. Thank you so much for hanging in with this. I've been going on for about an hour now. That's took rather longer than I thought. No idea I had so much to say. It's a delight to have you turn up and to speak to you. I hope it's helpful to you. Thank you for paying attention. And since it's December here at this time, I wish you all a very happy, joyful, festive season, whether you enjoy it, endure it, or choose to ignore it or avoid it. I hope whatever you do works well for you. And I have some more plans as yet unannounced for doing stuff like this in the new year. So I really hope to see some of you then. So thanks once again for showing up. I hope you found it useful. And with a bit of luck, a recording will be available shortly, technical gods permitting. So that's probably more than enough. And I'm just up on the hour. So wow, I'm off to have a drink of water and walk the dog now for a bit of light relief. So I wish you well, and cheerio for now. Thanks now. Bye-bye.